by abandoning the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Paris Agreement, questioning Americans' sacred commitment to NATO, repeatedly threatening to pull out of the Iran deal. This administration is calling into question what the word of the United States is actually worth. My dad used to have an expression, you're a man of your word, without your word, you're not a man. Simple proposition that applies to nations as well.
That was former Vice President Joe Biden, and a man that many people believe will be a future presidential contender in 2020. At CSIS last night in Washington, D.C., receiving the second annual Brzezinski Award, named in honor of your father. The first, of course, being the great Bob Gates last year getting it. And somebody who was there last night, former Secretary of Defense William Cohen. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being with us.
Good to be with you, Joe.
Thank you for coming last night.
And Mika, Joe Biden paid a great tribute to your dad.
Thank you. He did. Thank you.
So let's begin. We have a lot of different directions we could go. Let's start with the decertification of the Iran deal. President Trump is going against. It seems the Washington Post is reporting he's going to go against the recommendations of his Secretary of Defense, General Mattis, and decertify the Iran deal. What is your take on that? What are the consequences of that?
Well, Joe, I share the same sentiments that you expressed earlier in the program, namely that it was not a good deal to have given the Iranians the money up front and then hope that they were going to comply. Having said that, they have been complying according to all reports. And so this strikes me as another example of the president passing the buck. In other words, he's done this in the past where he said he favors torture, he favors waterboarding, but he'll let the military decide what to do. In this particular case, he's saying, I don't like this deal, I never have, but let Congress decide whether they want to go forward with more or less sanctions. So he's able to put the responsibility or shift the responsibility for major decisions to someone else. And so I think it's a pattern that I've seen him exercise before, and I think we have to come to expect he'll do it again in other particular situations.
Heidi, he did it with the Dreamers.
Mr. Secretary, on North Korea, there are some news reports suggesting that the North Koreans are so perplexed by Donald Trump's statements and his intentions that they've actually taken to contacting former U.S. officials. I'm wondering if you know anything about that, and if true, how unusual or concerning that would be, given where we are right now.
Well, you can look at that both ways, that the president has so shaken Kim Jong-un and his military establishment that they're looking for people who might try to divine what the president really has in mind. So I'm not sure that's an altogether bad thing, as long as they're reaching out to touch base with people that they feel might have some insight. I suspect they're also talking to the Chinese, which brings us to the Rex Tillerson case. I don't understand how a Secretary of State can go to another country preparing for the presidential visit, which is upcoming this month or next month, and not have a sheet of talking points to saying these are the issues we need to discuss with the Chinese leaders. I want you to explain to them very clearly we want more sanctions, we want to toughen it, we want to squeeze them in order to bring about a diplomatic or peaceful solution. So I would assume that those were the talking points that Rex Tillerson, Secretary Tillerson, had. And then the president undercutting him in the process, you're wasting your time. Well, I don't think we're wasting our time talking to the Chinese, because the only other alternative is to try to either provoke the North Koreans into taking some kind of action to which we can respond, or take action ourselves. And that would lead to tens, if not hundreds of thousands of deaths. So I don't understand what is taking place inside the administration. I can only observe from the outside, and it's confusing to me, certainly. I'm sure it's confusing to the Chinese and to the North Koreans. Again, that may work to our advantage by saying the North Koreans don't know what he's going to do, therefore they might be more inclined to come to the table. I don't think so, but maybe that's part of the strategy.
The New York Times, Nick Confessori.
Secretary, I'm curious about a theory that's going around in Washington that the president is deliberately embracing a madman theory of foreign policy, that if he keeps foreign opponents and even allies off balance, if he makes blunt statements and kind of uses brusque language, that it will somehow aid his foreign policy by keeping opponents off balance. Have you ever seen this stratagem work well in your time in foreign service and in American service?
Well, I've never seen it work well with someone who has had no prior experience in dealing with governmental issues. When Ronald Reagan came into the Oval Office, there were questions about, was he too hardline? Was he so anti-communist and so anti-Soviet Union that we were on the verge of going to war? I remember Bob Dole once said, having Ronald Reagan in the Oval Office is like having an MX missile, extra MX missile in the office. And so, to the extent that that the president had a reputation for being hardline, that worked to his advantage. He could make a deal with Mikhail Gorbachev. Now, that may be the strategy on the part of President Trump, but he doesn't really have the kind of substantive background and all the understanding of the implications of what he says and how that can be read. So I feel less confident under those circumstances if you keep poking and sticking a bear and trying to move that bear, that it might come back and try to bite you. So we'll have to wait and see. But again, it gets back to what you were talking about before. The president has sent another rabbit out on the White House lawn and asked the press to go chase it. What did he mean by implying that you'll see, wait till next week, fire and brimstone may be coming back again in vogue. So I think we have become accustomed to being addicted to what will he say next, and that may entertain us. I don't think it reassures us, and I don't think that it's a wise policy, if it is a policy, to pursue.
Mr. Secretary, it's Donny Deutsch. As a former cabinet member, and as you kind of watch the dance of the current cabinet, that there's this constant obligation of them to fawn and to, compliment and worship their boss. As a former cabinet member, just as you watch that, how does that make you feel?
It's embarrassing to watch. I looked at that meeting, in a cabinet meeting, where every official went around the circle praising the president as if he were a cult figure. To his credit, I saw Secretary Mattis indicate he was honored to be able to represent the men and women serving in our military. I thought that was the appropriate tone to take. This worship of the office, or seeking to reinforce a gratification experience by the president, I think it's certainly not consistent with what I have known and come to expect from a president. I want the president to act presidential. Can you imagine Ronald Reagan throwing paper towels out into a crowd of people who have been gone without food? Can you imagine President Kennedy doing the same, or George Herbert Walker Bush, or George W. Bush, or President Clinton, or Barack Obama? If Barack Obama had thrown those towels out into the audience like that, I think there would have been a reaction in this country which would have been overwhelmingly negative and critical. And yet we see this taking place on a day-by-day basis. And so I don't think there is a measuring up to the dignity of the office and the sanctity of the office. I still want the president to conduct himself in a way that doesn't draw down or demean the significance and the great privilege of occupying that office.
Can you imagine if Barack Obama had done that?
Yeah, that's an amazing thing to think about.
And if he'd done it in a tan suit, articles of impeachment would have been drafted at once.
Or let me go back to the NFL issue. This is something that I feel very strongly about. The president has taken upon himself to criticize a black athlete, Colin Kaepernick, for refusing to stand during the playing of the anthem. Now, that strikes me as something I would never, ever consider or recommend to anybody else. But he's protesting the killing of unarmed black people, and he's seeing that the only way he can get the world's attention, certainly America's attention. And so the president criticizes him for being unpatriotic. At the same time, we have people marching in Charlottesville carrying Nazi flags, wearing Nazi armbands, and shouting blood and soils and Jews will not replace us, and saying those are good people. Now, I don't understand how you can criticize a black athlete who's protesting from the depths of his heart to say, stop killing us. At the same time, you allow people or praise people carrying a Nazi flag, Nazi slogans, armed with AK-47s or AR-15s, and chanting Jews must go and blood and soil, and say they're good people. That strikes me as inconsistent with the obligations of the office itself.
And the values of this
Thank you so much for your
country.
comments.
Thank you.
Secretary William Cohen, thank you.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.